Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode of The Heart of Hospice is being sponsored by Care Boss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. Care Boss is the book that reminds family caregivers that they are the CEO of their loved one's care. Jennifer has served in healthcare leadership for over 35 years and was also the personal caregiver for her parents and her husband. Care Boss is written to empower caregivers, but it's more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizational tool as well. Check it out at jenniferaobrien.com.
Today's guest is Death Doula and Emmy-nominated children's television writer Darnell Lamont Walker. Darnell Walker is a writer, filmmaker, teacher, and healer, currently creating content in hopes that all children get to see themselves. He lives between the Chattahoochee National Forest of Georgia and Johannesburg, South Africa, but Charlottesville, Virginia is where Darnell calls home. Darnell realized his work artistically and in the wellness space leads people towards healing and happiness. He's worked in the end-of-life space as a hospice volunteer, a caregiver, an end-of-life doula, and transition guide, helping the dying as a warm and comforting presence as they face the unknown. He's got two different career paths, very different, working as a children's television writer and a death doula, and he's going to be explaining how he merges them. Darnell also believes that one of his greatest skills as a doula is his ability to listen to his patients, and as a result of that, he can advocate for them. He also shares the challenges that people of color face when they need health care and end-of-life services. So stay connected for this conversation with Emmy-nominated writer, documentary filmmaker, and death doula Darnell Lamont Walker. There's a lot to learn. Darnell, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm so glad to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
This is going to be an awesome conversation. So this is how we're going to get it started.
Right on. Look,
yeah,
that's funny. I have mine sitting right here.
Oh, are you? Oh, I love it. I love it. You have your own end-of-life deck. Okay, so I just pulled a question. I just pulled one. So here's your question is called Message from Beyond.
Ooh, okay.
If you could send one post-death message from beyond, what would you tell your family?
If I could send one post-death message from beyond, what would I tell my family?
I like this one because it's a little creepy.
It's creepy, but it would absolutely be like some sort of joke. I'd be like, hey, they don't have grapefruit juice over here. Please bring it with you when you come. And they'd be like, what? Like I feel like it has to be something that's like so off that they have to believe it, you know?
And they'll know it
Like,
comes from
and they
you
would
if you
know
say
it came
this?
from me.
I
Oh, they
love
would
it.
know. They'd be like, he did mention grapefruit juice. I think that's him. I think it has to be him. No one else drinks the stuff. So yeah, I think it would be, or yogurt. It would, oh God, it would be food related. I don't know. Food and drink related.
Yeah, the yogurt here is terrible. Bring some when you come.
Bring some when you come. Peach, please.
That's
Oh
hilarious.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going the joke route.
I like it. I like it. I have answered this question before, and I have 2 daughters, and my thought was to say something that was a little spooky, like you were haunting them a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
Something like, you need to stand up straight. I can see. Yeah, I can tell.
That's so good though. No, that's so good. They'd be like, oh God, oh, okay.
Yeah, they would
And
know
you
that
do
was
it.
me.
Yeah.
They would know it was me, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that.
Well, I am thrilled to have you with me, and we're already off to a good start. So let's dive into your interview. You're a children's television writer. Thank you for that,
am, yeah.
by the way. Sesame Street, we love it. And you are a death doula.
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
I am both of those things. It's strange. It's a very strange thing. I didn't write for Sesame, but I came in through Sesame. I got in through the Sesame workshop.
Yeah.
And that was my introduction into children's writing. But yeah, it's strange being both of those things to me sometimes. And so I'm, merging the two slowly, somehow, some way.
Yeah, it's quite a dichotomy, a duality. How do you find space for both of those things inside yourself? They seem to be polar opposites.
They do seem that way, and it's funny because I've always looked at it that way until just a few years ago. I was doing an interview, and the guy Sam who was interviewing me asked the same thing. And he's like, all these things in your life have nothing to do with each other. Like, you're a children's writer, you are a death doula, you are a documentary filmmaker. And then it was at that moment I thought, hey, well, all these things have to do with healing and finding joy and getting to the life we want. And then it all made sense. It's kind of like I felt like this bridge who I'm able to create stories that take kids from or teach kids how to grow and get kids from where they are to where they want to be. And as a death doula, that's exactly what I do with the people who are at the end of their life. Like, it's like, okay, where do you want to be? How do you want to get there? How do you want this thing to end? All right, this is how we're going to do it. And so it's all about finding joy, finding happiness, and getting where we want to be. So they seem opposite, but they're very connected in that way. And it's fun. And so now what I'm trying to do is convince the studios and the showrunners and all these folks who are in power to let me write episodes about death in a way that's authentic and in a way that we've rarely seen before. Like, we see the goldfish die every so often, we see the pet die, but I'm like, yeah, friends die too, grandmas die too, cousins and parents die also, or we die. And so so I'm trying to merge the two as we speak, and there are people saying, hey, I'd love to, let's bring you in, let's talk about it, let's find a way to do that. But I'm enjoying it.
That's a good conversation to have these days. I can't remember exactly what the statistics are, but they talked about like 1 out of every 6 kids lost a caregiving adult during the pandemic. So if you think kids don't need that kind of support, or they don't have that kind of experience, that's not true.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the number, guys, I don't want to get it wrong, but I'm just going to.
Yeah. I was just tossing that out.
I was speaking to Experience Camp, which is an amazing camp for kids who are dealing with the loss of someone in their life, a parent, caregiver, a friend. And actually, I just found it, thankfully. The number is 6 million. There are 6 million kids who are dealing with grief and dealing with loss and death. And, so why aren't we creating for these children? Like,
Yeah.
And even if it was smaller, even if it was, 20, these kids still deserve to see something on their screen and in their life that reflects what's going on and teaches them how to handle it, or teaches them steps they can take, or whatever it is. But it can also serve as a bridge for them.
Yeah. Do you think that our shortfall when it comes to supporting kids who are grieving a death or dealing with a death, do you think that's reflective of how lousy we are at having these conversations as adults?
Yeah, but it's such, yes. And it's such a cycle though, right? Like when we were kids, the adults were lousy at it, and
right.
and the adults that they had in their life were lousy at it. At some point, someone wasn't lousy, but I don't know where it changed. I just spoke at the National Funeral Directors Association convention, and it was incredible with JJ Duncan, and we went Sato, and we were talking about how we need to get back to the basics of death, because once upon a time, it was very community related. It was very family oriented. And those were times when we weren't afraid to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And it's sort of where we need to get back to. It's like, how do we get back there? And it's trying to train people to have those difficult conversations. Because even as a death doula, like I come in and if it's someone at the end of their life, the first thing I need to ask is, how do you want to die? And these are questions that they've never been asked. And the family's been afraid to ask these questions. And I don't have time to waste. So I have to get straight to the hard questions. And I enjoy asking the hard questions because it rattles them up. But then it's like, oh, I think I need to answer you. Okay. And then once we get through that, everything becomes a little bit easier. And so, yes, I think we've been trash at having the conversations because our parents were trash at having it. But I think now that we know, and we have things like the end of life deck and even the death deck, we can have these conversations with our parents and with our children because we know. And my dad's someone who will not talk about death. Like, he doesn't want to talk about it.
Really?
Doesn't want to visit people in the hospital. Doesn't want to do any of that.
He's just avoiding it completely in case it's contagious.
Avoids it, right? And so I come in and I'm like, no, let's talk about it. So I find a way to have that conversation, and I know he's trying to avoid it, but then he'll engage just because I'm his kid. But I'm like, no one else is going to do it. I got to be the one to have this conversation with you because I don't want you to die. And then there are too many questions. And what if I go before you? These are things I need you to know. Thankfully, my mom loves talking about it. I think at this point we just update each other on what needs to happen when it's time. But yeah, we know better, so we got to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an unlearning of this medicalized death. The model that we have for dying is very sterile. Grandma or mom's in the hospital. You're not exposed to any of it. And the next time you see her, she's in a box. She's been embalmed. You don't even have to see her if you don't want to. Yeah, very far removed from it. So I to me, it feels like an unlearning of all these habits we've had.
Absolutely. And it can't happen quick enough. It needs to be a little faster, because I don't know about you, but I think this past year and past few years for sure, I've had so many people in my life die, and unexpectedly. It was just like, what? He's dead? I think 2 people the other day just died who I went to college with, and it's kind of like we don't have time. So I keep trying to push that. Like, we don't have time to wait for these conversations. We keep saying one day, but
Yeah.
no, we have to do it now.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about your doula work. You are an unusual doula. I have to tell you, we've had plenty of doulas on the show before. You're the first male doula that I've had on the show. And you're younger.
It's strange.
Yeah. And you're African American. You're Black. So that's really an unusual persona for a doula, at least from my experience. What kind of skills do you bring to your work as a doula, do you think? What unique skills?
Yeah. Well, one, I'll say I didn't know that it was a rare thing until about a year ago. I think at the EndWell conference last year, and someone brought it up, and I was like, "Oh, have you not met someone?" And then I realized that I'd never met someone there. I was like, "You know what? Yeah, I don't know anyone either." Now, thankfully, I have a few friends who are like, "Yo, I'm going through the program, getting certified, or I really want to get into the work." So it's amazing to see. But for me, I think, like, I don't know what unique skills I bring. For me, I've just always been in this work. I'm able to have the hard conversations. I think a large part of what I do, being a Black man, and in this work, and growing up in the Black community, growing up in where I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, there was like there was a fight that had to happen, just to live in this society. And it was kind of, in the healthcare system, and watching family members go through the healthcare system. And so now I know how they dealt with it, and I watch them deal with it. And I watch my grandmother, who kind of brought me into this work unknowingly. I watched her go through this system. And so I'm able to approach it as someone who's seen how it goes, and able to use the skills that I've gained in that. So, like, listening skills, I can go with, like, a lot of what I do is going into and is advocating for my clients in the medical system, especially when they are Black, because I don't know if you know, there was a study done not long ago, just a few years ago, at the University of Virginia in my hometown, where they found a large amount of medical school students didn't believe that Black people felt pain on the level that white people felt pain.
What?
And I mean large amount. And I think this was 2013, 2016. And so, and this isn't anything, a lot of us didn't know. Black babies get less medication in the NICU than white babies. And, I've had to argue with my doctors on several occasions. But these are things I have to bring with me when I'm working with clients, and it's great that I know this, because a lot of my clients also have no idea. And so when they are getting very little pain management, it's like, oh, well, why? And I'll talk to them, and then I'll talk to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, I had no idea. I'm like, well, they told you the pain was a 20 out of 10.
Yeah,
and
get a clue.
You gave them Tylenol, and you gave them Tylenol. No, they want morphine, like the other patient got morphine. And so I'm able to bring those things with me. But overall, it's really listening. I think I always talk about, I had an effective listening class in college. And I took it because it seemed like the easiest course to take that semester. I was like, oh, well, everyone listens. It's fine.
Right.
And I got in there and realized,
how
hard could it be to have an effective to be a listener? And I got in there and realized that no one listens. No one listens to anyone. And I knew at that moment, like, oh, I have to be a listener. And I took it on. And that's the main thing that keeps me going. But I think that's a large part of my, I hate to call it success in this, because I don't know what success looks like in this death doula thing, but it's a large part of the job and a large part of how I approach each client.
Well, isn't listening really a huge part of advocacy? Because advocacy is supposedly passing on messages, communicating on behalf of someone else. But if you haven't listened to them to get to know what their priorities are, what their needs are, what their symptoms are, what their end-of-life wishes are, how can you be an advocate without effective listening? So that was time well spent in your class, your easy class that you thought it was going to be.
It was hard. There were people who failed. And so I just want to point that out.
Oh, my God.
I left with an A. Yeah, because everyone thought it was going to be easy. And nope. But
wow.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. But yeah, that's a huge thing. So the way the Black community has been cared for inside our healthcare system, you would hope that a lot of those old things about, the pain sensations, things like that those things would be gone and done with. Those prejudices is what it is. That's shameful. That's shameful to me.
It's tough, especially knowing that this was just, 10 years ago when this was done. And it's like, well, why did you think that? And then you have to think, well, where did this trickle down from, or what is this trickling down into? And so, okay, we don't feel pain. Okay, well, what else? How else are we different from the rest of humankind? And so it's embarrassing and the hospital is a top 100 hospital. When I grew up going to the hospital when I, hurt something and I still go there when I'm in my hometown, and it's like, I have a blood clotting condition, and I remember getting blood clot in my leg, and it was, the worst pain I've ever felt. And it was constant and frequent and all day, every day. And the doctor says, "Oh, what's the pain level?" And I tell him it's a 10. And he's like, "Oh, well, some Tylenol 3 should help." And I had to say, "Oh, did you give me this prescription because I'm Black?" And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I say, "Well," and I pull it up on my phone. I pulled the study up, and I was like, "I just feel like if I was white, you would have given me, Percocet or Vicodin or something else." And he reads it, and he's just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." And he writes me a prescription, and I didn't even take the medication. I didn't even take it. He wrote me a prescription for like Percocet or something, but I didn't even take it. It was just like the point.
Yeah.
I was like, it's bad. I'm glad to be able to advocate for folks and show the people who feel this way that they're wrong, and say, okay, listen, you didn't know. Here's how you can go moving forward. Or now let's do better.
Yeah. Self-awareness. Absolutely.
Self-awareness.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. We're going to pause for just a minute. My guest has more to share.
This episode is being sponsored by Care Boss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. More than 54 million Americans are serving as unpaid caregivers for family members, friends, or neighbors with serious illnesses. Very few have received the training, guidance, or emotional support they need to succeed in this role. Care Boss, the newest book by healthcare leader Jennifer O'Brien, fills this need by identifying and empowering the family caregiver as the leadership position it is. Jennifer shares her motivation for writing Care Boss.
I wrote Care Boss because I have been a serial family caregiver, and I have been a serial CEO in healthcare. And it occurred to me that the family caregiver position is indeed a leadership position. I would go so far as to say it is a leadership position of greater importance than the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, because this is your person.
Jennifer writes with compassion and hard-earned wisdom. Readers will appreciate the empowerment and camaraderie they find in the pages of Care Boss. Care Boss is more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizer that enables family caregivers to lead their loved ones' care sensitively and effectively. You can find Care Boss at your local indie bookstore or on Amazon, and at jenniferaobrien.com.
when it comes to end of life support in the community of color, because we know that people of color engage with hospice services way less than white people do, for a myriad of reasons. But what obstacles do you encounter? I mean, as a Black doula, do you still meet people in the Black community that don't want end of life support, that what you offer?
Yeah, it's this is fair. It's not new. Like what I do, like my grandmother did it, her mother did it, my mom, like all these people in my life have done this work. It wasn't called being a death doula. It wasn't called end of life services. It was just called, oh, that's my sister and she's taking care of me.
Yeah.
And that's just what it was. I think once we put a name on it, it's kind of, there's already a distrust of the medical system. And so it's kind of, there's times when I have to convince folks, Black folks especially, that I'm not a part of the medical system.
Right.
I'm here for you. So that's sometimes a challenge. I mean, it's rare these days, but it does happen. And so I come in talking about one, how Black grief, Black death is different in that it's more communal. And so I come in leading with community. And it's like, okay, how can we build community around you? And it's like, oh, you just want me to be with family as I'm going. And I'm like, yes, that's what we're going to do. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. Well, I don't want to be in the hospital. Okay, you don't have to be in the hospital. And so it's a lot of convincing that I'm not them.
Yeah.
And once we get past that, it's fairly easy. Everyone's been open to it. There are more people finding, like, oh, I wish I met you 2 months ago when my sister was dying. Oh, my sister or my brother's dying now. Can we have a conversation? I'm talking to a friend who I've known for years now about her son who just lost, her and her son just lost the grandmother in the family, her son's great grandmother. But she was like, that was his best friend and he's 8 years old. What do we do? And so more and more people are opening to it. I didn't have that when I was losing people. I remember my first friend died I think we were 12 or 13. The school principal just announced it on the intercom and said, if you need to talk to a guidance counselor, come on by. It's in this office. And that was it. And life just went on.
Yeah.
And no one talked about it at home, and so more and more people are finding their way to it. And for me, getting beyond the barriers is about finding what part of this work appeals to them most. And so if it's community, if it's, I just don't want to be in the hospital. Okay, well, let's figure out a way for you not to be in the hospital. Or, who's going to take care of me? Well, let's figure out who in the family is going to do that. And so that's how I can break through those barriers that could have stood in the way.
Do you have a lot of caregiving conversations?
As far as like who other
yes,
me as a caregiver, or
no, like how are you going to be cared for? Who's going to do the care? Where are you going to be? How long can they manage it? Do you have enough people to manage it? Do you have a lot of conversations as a doula about that aspect of advanced care planning?
Not a lot, but yes, some. And a lot of it is who's going to be here or who's going to do it. Thankfully, in the times when it's happened, when that conversation's come up, there has been someone who's been more than willing to be the caregiver. But so then the conversation becomes, okay, well, how can I help you as the caregiver be the best that you can be? Because what happens is a lot of times that I've noticed when I come in, I'm usually working alongside the caregiver, and the caregiver is often not taking care of themselves. And so it's like, okay, well, we're both here taking care of this person who's at the end of their life, but how can we take care of you? And how can I help take care of you? So I find myself doing both jobs, which is part of my job. And I mean, I always love showing people ways to practice, radical self-care anyway. And so it's great. So yeah, that's where the caregiving goes for me in this work.
So for you personally, what do you struggle with when it comes to your doula work? What's your least favorite part of doula work?
The least favorite part for me is when the person who's dying dies, and then it's the working with those who are left behind. Like I love doing that, but it's the hardest part, because even though we've spent however long talking about what happens next, this is how we're going to handle this, it all still goes out of the window, and we have to come, and then we have to figure it out, because it's like, oh, I can tell you this stuff and I can give you this information before the person dies, and it's all great. It's like, okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's okay. That's good. That's good. That's good. But then death happens, and it's all back to zero, and it's relearning what all of those things look like based on how these individuals grieve. And so it's the hardest part, and yeah, probably the least favorite, but also helping them find that path, and walking alongside them through that. I love that. So I don't know if I'd call it the least favorite,
but it's hard.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It is tough. It's tough. It's tough. And you don't know how long it'll last. And we never know. And it's just, okay, I want to give you these tools, and one day they may become useful, but right now I know they're not, and I'm sorry about that. Because then it just feels like, well, what is all this for? Like as soon as someone dies, like, well, what? None of this makes sense.
Yeah, but isn't that the nature of grief, right? You can.
Mm-hmm.
It was Barbara Carnes said, you can learn about grief and know about grief, but you don't really understand it until you are a griever yourself. It's not the same.
Yes.
It's all theoretical until you're applying it in your own grief situation, and then you're filtering it through all this emotional crap. And yeah, none of it makes any sense. Self-care, that's a bunch of bullshit. Who's going to
Like,
do that?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah, but I think it's important.
No, absolutely.
I think it's important that we say what you're saying about time. You get to grieve for as long as you want in the way that you want. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. That's. I mean, perfectly said. That's. That's it.
Yeah. People get to take their time. So I want to touch back on something that you said about Black grief. You talked at EndWell, and you spoke about this, how Black grief is different. Tell me about this, please, and how you as a Black man companion the dying in the Black community. How is Black grief different?
It's Black grief is different in that it is a communal thing. Right? We are a very communal people, and so we do grieve the people. Our grandmother just died, our mom or cousin or whoever, they died, and while we're grieving that, we're grieving so many other losses, so many other deaths. I was just talking about moving from before this interview, talked about moving from New York. I was in New York during the protests during George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. That, like, we heavily grieved that, because it wasn't just the man who was killed. It wasn't just a young woman who was killed. This is like a cousin. This was an uncle. Like I see myself in this.
Part of the community.
Part of the community. When Obama said that Trayvon Martin could have been his son, like that's what grief looks like for us. And now, I have a friend who just lost his husband about a month ago. And so that grief is heavy. He just texted me today and said, I have nowhere to put this love, And while he's grieving that, we also had an election Tuesday. And so now it's just compound grief, and it's grieving in communities that happens for us, where it's never an individual who died. And so, Betty down the street, whose daughter died, we don't know who her daughter was, never met her, but we are there with Betty, taking care of Betty, helping her through this, and her grief becomes our grief. And so it's different in that way. And I love that about it, because community is how so many of us it's where so many of us find healing as well. But the curse, or the downside, is that it's so constant. Like, I don't know if grief ever stops in the Black community. There's just always grief. There's always loss. There's always death. For me, it's being able to show up, and again, I go in and for everyone, I just ask, how do you want to die? But also, when I go into the Black community, I figure out immediately how we're going to create community for the dying. And it's, I get the phone call. It's like, okay, well, who's there? Who's around? Who can help? When my friend lost his husband, as soon as he sent me a message to tell me that he had died, my question was, well, who's there? Who's around?
Yeah, who's with
you? Who can you call? Who's with you? Because I knew who was in his community, and I knew who he didn't want to be in his community, and so that's how I do it. That's at least the base of it all.
Yeah, the foundation of it.
The foundation. Yeah.
It strikes me that what you're saying is something that hospice workers do all the time. End of life workers do. Who can I call to be with you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who's important to you? Who can we gather to you to support you? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's all about community. Darnell, how do you deal with your own compassion fatigue?
I listen, I practice enormous amounts of self-care. I love food. When I feel it coming on, I find ways to like I'll step back, I'll recharge. I have this amazing little place in the middle of the forest on a little body of water. So I'll just sit out there and listen to the water. I journal. I think everyone should journal. That's free therapy. I put that out there often. But it's always food. It's food is like, I call friends, I get recipes. And I just love to cook and invite people in to cook and invite people in to do all these things with me. So again, it's about community. I deal with that in community as well. This week, like I have some friends coming up today who I'm like, listen, come up, we can all sit around and hug each other, cry, and go through this hard stuff and find some joy at the end of the day and tomorrow. And it's all of that. It's writing down what do I need, and again, going back to listening to myself, and it's like, what do I need? Because sometimes it might not be that. Sometimes it might be, I need to be alone in a dark room with all the curtains drawn, where I can sleep for 15 hours and watch Love Boat and do nothing else.
I love it.
By the way, I have been binging the Love Boat for the last 2 months, and I found that is keeping me sane through some wild times.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm a Love Boat fan. I'm old enough to know what
It's
that
amazing.
is.
It's amazing. It's an amazing show. It's an amazing show.
But I love
Yeah.
your self-awareness that you know that sometimes you need solitude and you're willing to change your self-care based on what seems to be the best solution at the time, to have your friends with you and also to care for other people as they are doing the same thing that you are doing. Which I think can be a part of self-care. You know, they talk about volunteering being a really good way to care for yourself spiritually. So that's really what you're doing. It's serving other people. So what's your go-to comfort food that you like to cook when you're doing self-care?
Oh my gosh. Sloppy Joe. I got off the top of my head.
Oh,
A sloppy Joe. I'm like, you know what? Easy to make, and I want it like completely sloppy on Hawaiian buns. So it's like the little bit of sweetness, sloppy Joe,
yeah.
and back to the grapefruit juice because I love grapefruit juice. Sloppy
man.
Joe and grapefruit juice.
Yeah, sloppy Joe's. If it hasn't run down onto your shirt, you didn't make it right.
Yeah, you didn't make it right. If the cleaner does not know you by name, you have not made a sloppy Joe properly.
Exactly. That's some nostalgia for me too. We used to eat those when I was a kid. It was an easy dinner, you know.
It was an easy dinner on a Friday night, and it made me happy. So mom was like, "Let's go buy some loose hamburger meat and a can," and that was it's like 3 ingredients. It's
not super healthy. We are not going to say it's healthy, but man, delicious.
It's horrible. Yeah, but delicious.
Darnell, you're doing some amazing work in your community, in the human community. And you've got a voice that's loud and contributing some wonderful things. How can my listeners connect with you and follow you and see what you're doing?
Yeah, right on. I'm at darnellwalker.com. I think everywhere. I'm on all the social medias. Hello Darnell or hello.darnell on Instagram, and Threads, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere. And I love talking about death. I love having conversations. I love, learning about death, learning different ways to do death, learning different ways to do life. And so, please feel free. Don't hesitate to reach out to me on any topic, anything around death. I'm everywhere.
Well, and I'm here to tell you that works because that's exactly how I connected with you was I stalked you on social media.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And we finally made it here. And I'm like, yes.
Perfect. You have some great content. I love your messaging. I love your voice. So thank you so much for being with me today. You are awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.